Welcome, and it's great to see you all here. My name is Ron Brumer. I'm from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Executive Director of Operations. It's a pleasure to see many known faces and many unfamiliar faces, which is also great. We have a packed list of speakers today and a fascinating program that I hope will be extremely beneficial and helpful for you guys. I will just explain really in 30 seconds what is going on. We have speakers who will speak, every speaker for 5 minutes exactly, and this is aimed to all of you speakers. I will be very strict, so very diplomatically, I will let you know when your 5 minutes are coming to an end. When the speakers speak, you will have the opportunity to write any kind of question that you want to raise to the speakers through the chat, okay? We will have you muted throughout the entire session. As I said, this is the only reasonable and manageable way to have this, but you can write me as the host of this event any kind of question you want for any kind of speakers. So as from the moment that the first speaker starts speaking, feel free to write any question and just mention to whom is this question aimed. I think that's about it about technicalities. I have the honor to introduce my very good friend, the co-host and the co-founder of this roundtable, Dan Diker, a JCPA fellow. As I said, the co-host of today's event. Dan is the editor of the recently released Israelophobia and the West, the hijacking of civil discourse on Israel and how to rescue it. And then we'll take a couple of minutes to lay out the context of today's special roundtable. So Dan, you are the first one to be unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's an honor to be unmuted and to be a partner of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. I want to just thank you on behalf of our president, Ambassador Dr. Dori Gold, who is on the call, and you'll formally introduce him in just a minute. This is really a great cooperation and an important cooperation, Ron, and to your Director General, Taki Gabrieli. We are at a critical moment for Israel and the Jewish people. I think it's clear to everyone on this call that we're all confronting the coronavirus pandemic. And in the pandemic, there's an acute threat, and then there's an underlying challenge. The acute threat, of course, is just staying healthy or recovering. And one knows that in confronting this pandemic, if there's an underlying illness, it makes it much more difficult for a person to overcome the acute threat of the virus. The same thing in what we are dealing with here today, because we're not only dealing with the virus, we're dealing with a corona conspiracy, as part of our title suggests today in this call. And the acute corona conspiracy, as everyone on this call knows, is manifested through social network conspiracies from the Iranian regime against Israel and the Jewish people, from Turkey throughout the United States. Just go on to social networks. It's not a surprise to anyone. Israel engineered, the Jews engineered and spread this virus. The Jewish state engineered and spread this virus. But there's an even deeper issue, Ron, going on behind all of this acute threat of the coronavirus and the corona conspiracy pandemic. And that is what we call Israelophobia, which is a phenomenon that we at the Jerusalem Center gathered at the sanction and at the advice of Ambassador Gold a year ago to begin to study this phenomenon, whose principles basically intersect with the new anti-Semitism, and at the same time, this anti-Semitic or Israelophobic rhetoric is being masked and masqueraded in many circles in the West as political critique. And that confusion, meaning the masking of Israelophobic language against Israel as an underlying cause or an underlying condition that weakens Israel in the face of a pandemic or a corona conspiracy, accusations such as Israel is an apartheid state or a genocidal state or a racist state by its constitution, or a state that engages in war crimes. This type of rhetorical assault has been going on for some time. And as Ambassador Gold suggested, that our fellows and that our analysts and that our colleagues who are on this call, many of the invited guests on this call are authors in this compendium. We gathered at the Jerusalem Center last year to begin to understand what is the red line between Israelophobia as a version of the new anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism. Where are the guideposts? What are the principles underlying Israelophobia, and what are the principles underlying legitimate political civil discourse on Israel? So that gives us a little bit of context, and it really begs the question: to what extent is this entire discussion from the acute situation of Corona and the Corona conspiracy reality that we face today, and the underlying problem, Israelophobia, to what extent does that create a national security challenge for Israel and by extension the Jewish people around the world? So we invite everyone to come on to the Jerusalem Center site at jcpa.org and download for free the PDF file on Israelophobia in the West, the hijacking of civil discourse and how to rescue it, hijacking of civil discourse on Israel and how to rescue it. And I turn it back to you, Ron, having these contextual questions with us during today's talk.
Thank you very much, Dan. And now I have the pleasure of having Tzachi Gavrieli, our Director General, the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, to share with us his insights. Just a second, please. Just a second, friends. This is okay. Just a second. Bear with me right now.
Okay. Thank you, Ron Brumer. It's so good to see here so many friends, collaborators, partners. We're hitting 218 participants on this special roundtable. It's really a very successful one. Thank you, JCPA, for this collaboration. You came with a specific and very. I would like to thank here both Dr. Shai Hartzvi, head of our research department in the ministry, and Yaakov Dalal for having this new notion that we see a convergence between the old and the new, the classic and the modern, in terms of the test case or the case study of COVID-19. And we should ask ourselves, not only as monitoring, not only as reporting, not only as investigating this, how do we react to this new, I would say, phenomena, new status. In terms of, and you would see the screen is, you have two sides of the screen. From left, you would have classic anti-Semitism. From the right, you would have modern anti-Semitism delegitimization. And I will be very briefly in a minute, just share with you a few of the thoughts that we have been developing in the ministry regarding few elements of this phenomena of COVID-19, the coronavirus. Now, in terms of actors, and then you have been very articulate about this a minute ago, we see the far right, and on the other hand, we see the BDS movement continuing. We see Turkey, we see Iran as state actors, and we see the PA and Hamas. We'll see in a minute examples. If you need examples of how they delegitimize the Jewish state, we could speak about the motive. And the motive is all about, it's basically the same motive, but just two different, I would say, targets. The first one is all about Jews, and the second one is all about Israel as using the virus or described as interested in the spread of the virus. And if you need examples, you would see the classic one. Just 2 weeks ago, a week ago in Germany, it's in German, it's be careful, Corona infected with a Star of David, a yellow one. I don't think I have to explain more than that. And if we speak about the modern one, you would see how the Israel is working with the virus to control Palestinians. And if we have to think about what is the blood libel that we're using in terms of from classic to modern, so you have the all about controlling. It's again about Jews in Israel. For one end, Jews controlling the world and making a profit out of the coronavirus spread. And on the other hand, you would see Israel controlling the Palestinians using the coronavirus. And if you need examples, you would see from left, the former economic minister, the French economic minister, a Jewish person, versus Israel and the IDF. This is coming from BDS organization and BDS outlet, Mundo Vice and Latuf, one of the animators associated with the BDS movement, all about Gaza and the quarantine in Gaza, and Israel is using the COVID-19 in order to control Palestinians. How about the threat to violence when it will start moving from the social media sphere into the physical sphere? We have to be thinking about it in terms of both what is happening in different areas of the world. This is taken from the US on the left side of the screen. And of course, Hamas, not by chance or just wasn't merely just in coincidence using the 6 million number as he was the Hamas leaders threatening Israel. And in terms of, violence, we have to, I would hope we could speak about this because this could lead to an eruption of violent attacks against Jews. And we have to think about it as a community. And just before ending and sharing a few thoughts about the discussion, we would like to share with you that the ministry has been using all of its digital outlets, mainly 4IL, in order to fight from fake news to delegitimization to conspiracies to, of course, anti-Semitic remarks. We invite you to join this campaign, this digital. It's very successful. More than 1 million people have been exposed to these messages. It's a tough job, and we're aiming it mainly to teenagers because we understand that education is what we have to do in this very specific times. And the ending note, and here I would conclude, we have to speak about monitoring, about reporting online abuse, as we understand that the world could be continuing for long weeks. This quarantine and the social media sphere is now the outlet of then, as you have called it, Israelophobia. And I think it's a good opportunity to have a glance or an outlook at the recommendations coming from the UN Special Rapporteur, Ahmed Shahid, about the increased security, Jewish institution, advanced hate speech legislation, and adopt the IRA definition. So in this concluding, I would like to thank the organizers and extend my gratitude to all of the attendances here on this roundtable. Thank you.
Tzachi, thank you very much. I will just repeat once again for those who joined, you are more than welcome to write any kind of question you might have for any of the speakers in the chat. I already see the questions pouring in. So send me those questions and we will have a designated time, hopefully as much as possible, for questions for the speakers. Okay, we are moving on. Our next speaker is a personal hero of mine, Mr. Natan Sharansky, former Israel Deputy Prime Minister, former chairman of the Jewish Agency. I assume all of you know him quite well. Mr. Sharansky's topic will be, he will help us understand the degree to which Corona conspiracy and Israelophobia constitute the national security challenge to Israel, and what can be done about it. So, Mr. Sharansky, you are unmuted and ready to go.
And welcome everybody. And I think Tzachi made a wonderful presentation. So you said we are limited by 5 minutes. I'll take 3 minutes. I hope will be enough to simply to develop on what just now Tzachi was saying. First of all, there is nothing new in this world. After all, each time when there is some disaster or plague, Jews are responsible. Plague of the Middle Ages brought the whole Jewish communities were burned alive. Today, thanks to the new era and the state of Israel, nothing like this can happen. But the moment you see there is the coronavirus, well, if to summarize all the accusations, they come to these two old axioms that Jews are the evil, they are the source of evil, and Jews are making money on this evil. So Jews are the evil and the money is their God. And today's accusations about how the source of all these diseases coming from synagogues, coming from Israel, it's the same old accusations. And the fact that Jews are those who planned how to make money on this. We can read it in Turkey, in Iran, in France, in Germany, in America, and the world is now belongs to the internet, and internet, we have a lot of this. And on the other hand, Israel is the center of this evil. Israel was developing biological weapons, and as a result, there is corona, and so on and so on. So what is good in this situation? That practically all this new and old anti-Semitism is coming together. If in the past we had to make such big efforts, I came with my 3D principle, and later we had to convince the world that there are forms of Israel, criticism of Israel, which are anti-Semitism. Look at the defamation, the legitimization, double standard, the same weapons. Today, you don't need to convince anybody. That's exactly what both sides are saying. In fact, the situation is so, I would say, morally, there is such a moral clarity, if you can use these words, as in the times of Stalin. When I was growing in the Soviet Russia, everybody knew when they speak about Zionism, they mean Jews, and vice versa. And when there was doctors' plot against doctors who are trying to kill Soviet leaders, they were called Zionist agents. There was no difference between Jews and Israel. What's good in this propaganda of Corona, again, there is no difference. And when Ku Klux Klan is saying that it is Jewish people and Zionists who brought this evil, and in fact all the others. So that's on good side, that now our enemy doesn't make any difference between Jews and Israel. But on the other hand, we shouldn't forget that in fact, this message goes to different audiences at the same time. And the sources of this are different. We are living in this postmodern world of intersectionalism, where the philosophy of the left is mainly that the world is divided. It's divided on imperialists, colonialists, racists, anti-feminists, and on the other hand, on the victims. And Israel is very clearly on that side. And Palestinians, as a result, are victims. And that's why, and the so-called progressive or extremely liberal circles are very acceptable to this idea. And that's why if you think that these ideas about Jews being responsible or Israel being responsible is so crazy that no normal intellectual will not buy it, I want to remind you that when it was in Haiti, about 12 or whatever years ago, and the Israel army came to help and did better than anybody in the world, And on some internet, I think from Indonesia, there was a stupid remark that Israelis came to harvest organs of their victims. This stupid remark, in the end, there were requests in political circles in Germany and in Britain from the so-called progressive forces to make an investigation, because it has to be checked whether Israel made such a crime. So when, as Saki said, when the world will be open from internet to serious political debates, we can see it because on this new anti-Semitism of the left is a good ripe soil for this. On the other hand, of course, classical anti-Semitism, accusing of Jews of spoiling the life of mankind always, that's also a good topic for them. So we can win it. Here I repeat myself from my other appearances. We can win in this battle if we, or those of us who are dealing with the new national movements, new national parties, governments, national governments, which are response to postmodernism, should remember we have to demand from them to fight with the anti-Semitism on the right. If their supporters are using any of this language of blaming Jews, we should keep them responsible for this. And on the other hand, now that in America there is beginning a big campaign, presidential campaign, as a result, the voices of so-called liberal post-intersectionalists will be heard more and more stronger. We have to demand from those who are on the left to make it very clear that they will not permit to these new labels, that they will not use it, in fact. No, they will not permit. They will not try to dismiss it. They will not try to say, no, that's something which belongs only to the right. That's not, the coronavirus is the threat to all the world, and these attacks on Jews is a threat to all the world. And we have to mobilize all our forces on the left and on the right to fight with this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharansky, for these inspiring words. I would like to introduce our next speaker, and that is obviously Ambassador Dori Gold. He is the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a former Director General of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a former Israeli ambassador to the UN. Ambassador Gold will share his thinking on how the corona pandemic presents national security challenges and opportunities for Israel. So Ambassador Gold, you are unmuted, and go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and I've very much enjoyed the contributions of everybody so far. You know, it's sort of uncomfortable speaking about what are the opportunities created by the coronavirus. You know, that's sort of like saying, well, what are the opportunities created by cancer? You know, it's just not the kind of way we should try and present this. But I understand what you're getting at, and frankly, I will give some support to the idea without giving that particular line in my own talk. I'm going to speak very briefly. And I've been thinking about, well, what do we do? What do we do when we have this kind of new wave of anti-Semitism? And this one is now going to become increasingly linking the revival of anti-Semitic ideas with a disease that we see growing across the world. I mean, if that isn't anti-Semitism, I don't know what is. You know, we had actually roughly 10, 12, 15 years ago, the beginnings of a parallel phenomenon. And that's when the Ebola virus started coming out, started becoming a real threat in West Africa. Because I served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was sensitized to African developments far more than I would have been had I just not had that position in the foreign ministry. And what essentially occurred was, as Israel became more aware, cognizant, active in fighting these infectious diseases like the Ebola virus, certain parts of Africa became much more aware of Israel's positive role. And I, at the time, as a director general, took my ministry delegations to some of the hardest places in Africa from the standpoint of anti-Semitism, for example, South Africa. But we also went into West Africa. We basically began with a line that began in the area of the Atlantic Ocean, and you could stretch it right across the Sahara Desert out to Sudan. And that's where our teams were active. That's where our teams were making our case. And the fact that Israel was fighting disease, because we weren't coming to Africa to sell weapons. We weren't coming to Africa to, to deal with the usual issues, which is, for example, water purification, et cetera. We, in this case, were coming, among other reasons, because we had this experience and we had been very successful. In fighting Ebola, Israel made a pledge to the United Nations, and it was the largest per capita pledge made. One of the places I visited was Guinea-Conakry. We call it Guinea-Conakry because that's the capital, Conakry. And if you go there, it is not a pleasant country to visit. It's a country that requires a lot of development. But they were one of the countries afflicted by the Ebola virus. And this was a country, it was a Muslim country. It was a country that cut diplomatic relations with Israel back in 1967. And it was a country which was seeking to reestablish diplomatic relations. And the president sent his chief of staff to Paris to meet me, and we brought international lawyers and we signed the resumption of diplomatic relations. So I'm telling that story because I think part of the strategy of fighting the new anti-Semitism that we're seeing that might even come through the coronavirus is finding allies in the developing world, and they can become the greatest spokesman for Israel. It may sound a little bit hopeful, but I've seen it and I think it can be done. And I believe that if we establish those relationships, work on them, invest in them, we can develop a real block to the spread of anti-Israel Israelophobia in large parts of Africa. To the contrary, I think many of these countries want to get back with us because they see us being so proficient in so many areas. And now when you add to that the fight against infectious diseases in Africa, you have something which these countries really, really need. So that's my friendly suggestion. It requires a lot of staff work and it requires a lot of teamwork, but I think that's the way we should go. So I'll pass the microphone, so to speak, or the Zoom to the next speaker. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dory. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, I believe that if you open the dictionary under the word turbo or dynamo, you will see this smiling face, right, looking back at you. So Ilan Carr is the U.S. Special Envoy for monitoring and combating anti-Semitism. And Ilan, Mr. Carr, will assess the wave of anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist assaults against Jews and the Jewish state and what can be done to counter it. So Ilan, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. And let me begin by thanking the Ministry of Strategic Affairs for yet again showing how you are at the cutting edge of such important work on behalf of the Jewish people in the state of Israel and really for a better world. Ron Brumer, you and I met, I think it was one of my first speeches upon my appointment a year and a few months ago. And we've been great friends and partners ever since. Tzachi, you're the best. And of course, Minister Gilad Erdan has done such amazing work. So thank you to MSA. Thank you also to JCPA, the Jerusalem Center, with all of your remarkable thought leaders that have made such a difference in the world. And I want to, of course, especially commend those who preceded me a few moments ago. Dan Diker, your book is awesome. And of course, Natan and Dori, you are inspiration. So thank you all, and thanks for this important program. For the last year since I've been in this position, I have pounded the proverbial table around the world to say that the so-called new anti-Semitism that focuses on Zionism and the state of Israel is really not new at all. It is old classic Jew hatred, simply adjusted for the modern circumstance of the existence of the Jewish body politic. Anti-Semitism, in order to stay relevant, has always done that. It is the Jew hatred that always adopts current events and always ultimately makes the case, tries to make the case, that Jews represent a threat. Jews represent a threat to what? Well, they represent a threat to religion. They represent a threat to values. They represent a threat to public health. They represent a threat to economic health. They represent a threat to national or ethnic purity. And all of this through, conspiratorial tactics in an effort to undermine the good order of things. And that's the basic theme. But of course, anti-Semitism adopts current events. How could it not, by the way? I mean, there should be no surprise that there would be a tsunami on social media and the internet that blames Jews for anti-Semitism. That blames Jews for the coronavirus. How could that not happen, after all? Because the whole world is focused on the coronavirus. So how would we expect anti-Semites not to do what they've always done, which is to point to current events and blame the Jew for the current maladies facing the world? And so that's what we're seeing now. And so just like the hatred of Zionism in the state of Israel, the hatred of the Jew by blaming the Jew for the coronavirus is simply a classic age-old manifestation of anti-Semitism and what anti-Semitism does. Now, let me tell you what my office is focused on in light of current events. First of all, like I said, there is this wave of coronavirus-related anti-Semitism. I do want to say it's not clear yet. It's too early to tell whether this marks an increase in anti-Semitism or simply a realignment and refocus of anti-Semitism. That will be measured, that volume will eventually be measured, and we'll know the answer. Some say, yes, it's actually an increase in overall anti-Semitism. Some say, no, it's simply the flavor of the day, but it doesn't mark an increase. We'll find that out. But what we're also focused on in the long term, because look, the coronavirus, God willing, will be soon behind us, and we'll be back to a healthy time and the end of these quarantines. But what will be more will be less short-lived, and what will take longer to overcome is the profound economic dislocation that the coronavirus has brought. The closure of the economy of the earth is unprecedented and has led to really profound and tragic suffering of many, many people, millions and billions of people throughout the world. And that will take longer to fix. And what we know throughout history is that at times of economic suffering, the Jew is always in the crosshairs. And not only in terms of blame and rhetoric and incitement, but in terms of actual violence. Currently, people are holed up in their homes. But when they're not holed up in their homes, and when people are out of work, those among them who are anti-Semites, most are, thank God, not, but those who are anti-Semites among them can be expected to focus their attentions as they always have. And that's sort of a more long-term issue, and we are deeply focused on that. My team and I are intensely focused on a strategic plan to deal with this. Now, in the time allotted to me, I don't have, I can't drill down on our priorities, but let me in a nutshell summarize them. And these are our absolute focal points for the coming year. First of all, physical security, because if one cannot feel safe, one cannot have quality of life. So ensuring physical security for Jewish communities around the world is priority one. Second of all, adoption of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and appointments of national anti-Semitism coordinators. The IRA definition has been a game changer precisely because through its examples, it strips the veneer and the ideological dress-up of anti-Semitism and allows us to say with definition and with certainty what is and is not anti-Semitism. And that regards the new anti-Semitism that focuses on Zionism in Israel, as well as the classic anti-Semitism. So adoption of IRA, the appointment of national anti-Semitism coordinators is critical. Another priority is dealing with the internet, which is, let's face it, the chief vector of this social disease. The internet does not cause anti-Semitism, but it is the carrier of anti-Semitism. And we have to be able to address it, not through censorship. We will stand to protect the First Amendment in the United States. It is sacrosanct, but we've got to deal with the main propagator of anti-Semitism and hatred. And I have a team member, it's unprecedented, by the way, but one of my newly appointed assistant special envoys is tasked with focusing specifically on internet hate. Never before happened in the history of the office I hold. And that's how seriously we're taking this. And lastly, and I save this for last, because while some of our weapons are defensive, some are offensive, almost all are tactical. This is the only strategic weapon to deal with anti-Semitism over the long term, and that is education, education, education. We have to get serious about this. And education doesn't mean only education in anti-Semitism, education about the Holocaust. All of that is critical. The world does not do a good enough job in that field. Of course, a CNN poll in Europe recently showed that fewer and fewer Europeans know about the Holocaust. Some have even not heard about the Holocaust. In the United States, there's a problem as well. So yes, of course we have to educate in anti-Semitism, but that's not what I mean. I'm talking about a philo-Semitic education, so that every kid in every classroom is given a curriculum that teaches what the Jewish people are and what Jewish contributions have been to that kid's country. Because you cannot tell the history of England or France or Germany or Poland or Russia or Hungary or the United States without talking about Jewish contributions to these countries. And so if we really want to get serious, if we want to get strategic, if we want to go on the offense against this indefatigable hatred that metamorphosizes in each generation and with each current event, we have got to drive an educational curriculum so that kids in classrooms in every city, in every country, know what the Jewish people are, know what Jewish values are, know what the Jews have brought to the world. And then, and only then, will we be able truly to work together to build that better world that our children and grandchildren so richly deserve. In that work, I know that I have no better partners. The United States has no better partners than the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, of course, also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs of Israel, and amazing organizations like the Jerusalem Center. Chazak u'varuch for all of your great work, and thank you for really standing shoulder to shoulder with decent people around the world to build that better future for us all.
Ilan, thank you so much. I have to admit, I've heard you at least 20 times, and every time you bring a new angle, a different way of thought. So I appreciate it on behalf of all of us. Thank you very, very much. Just one technical thing. I repeat, when you send your questions, because I see many questions piling up, please write to whom you are addressing the question and not a general question, because then I will have to decide who to address it to, and that will be complicated. Our next speaker, Mr. Malcolm Online, whom I assume all or most of you know. Malcolm is the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and Malcolm will address the connection between Israelophobic rhetoric and the threat of physical violence against diaspora Jews and what can be done. Malcolm, go ahead.
Thank you. I think, as Dorothy Parker said, everything has already been said, just not everybody has said it. So I'll try and bring a little bit of a different angle. I think what we've learned in this latest experience with COVID is Kol ha'olam gesher tzar ma'od, that the world is really a very narrow bridge. And just as the virus can cross oceans and borders and mutate and adapt to different circumstances, we see that anti-Semitism is doing the same thing. But I draw hope and inspiration from the fact that you could finally get a government in Israel that we will be able to cope with these issues as well. I will address one aspect in a minute, but I think we have to remember that we came into this from a period of rising anti-Semitism here in the United States, increased physical and other assaults. The latest ADL poll shows that half of American Jews said they have experienced or know somebody who experienced an anti-Semitic attacks. Our numbers now parallel those in Europe. And this should be of concern because people feel insecure about going to Jewish institutions, that many of them do not wear any outward symbol, a Magen David, let alone a yarmulke or anything else in public. Some don't even put their last names down if they are obviously Jewish names. So we are in a climate now where anti-Semitism has moved from the more public assaults, although we see in the last 10, 15 days, we've had a number of assaults on synagogues and Jewish institutions, that it's moved more to the internet and social media. And we have, the COVID has so eclipsed all the other issues that there's no real serious discussion of anything but that. And of course, it's taken the resources as well. So we've seen the ability of them to blame Jews, to create these terrible caricatures here in America. We know from history that blood libels and come about at the times of such tragedies or plagues, and often end up with making Jews the victims. And I think that we are seeing that. And when they target Jews now, they are also targeting Israel, and sometimes targeting Israel in order to target Jews. I think it's become increasingly interchangeable in many respects. We don't know yet the true scope or extent or the ultimate damage that the virus has done. I want to talk about the day after, because what's going on now will continue for weeks, for months, different countries, different lengths. But we have not really focused and talked about what we will likely face when this is over. The social dislocation, all of the ramifications for social unrest, for economic distress, for the people who are going to be unemployed. And half of Americans have less than $500 in reserves. That will run out even with the aid programs. So when people are hungry, they resort to other things. When stores are boarding up their windows because they're afraid of looting or demonstrations and protests that may come. When the bill for trillions of dollars in aid comes due, when the lost wages, when stores don't reopen, when schools may not reopen, the impact on many Jewish organizations who may not be able to weather this, aside from the human cost and staff, we have not considered in a really thoughtful long-term way, how are we going to cope with this, and how will our ability to cope with the rising anti-Semitism that is likely to come by our communities, by our institutions. I know they continue to work and they continue to monitor it. Will people come back to Jewish events and Jewish institutions? Maybe they'll come back more because they'll have missed it. Or will they be afraid? Or will they now become alienated and find that the internet is more than enough for them to satisfy their needs? And what about the return to campus? We have seen that the BDS movement has not gone to sleep. It's not hibernating. They went to Congress about Israel's blocking aid to Gaza and used that to try and mobilize support to cut aid and to punish Israel. And they're still working it. And they're working it in other media and within student groups to try to promulgate this lie, and as they have all along with other issues when it comes to demeaning or denigrating Israel. So after months of confinement and with all of these challenges, internal, economic, etc., social, it's a fertile ground for anti-Semitism. It's exactly where it flourishes. And so I think we have to collectively look more long-term at this and to see what it is we can do, how we prepare, how we get materials ready. I think the political division, somebody alluded to it, we're going to face conventions, a convention that will be very polarized. We have Sanders delegates who obviously have an Israel agenda that is contrary to what the Jewish community would like to see. We have other forces there as well. We can't write off the Democratic Party. We're trying to work with it, but I think it will be a real challenge. I think we have to do more to follow the lead of New York State to declare anti-Semitism domestic terrorism, and that the attacks really get severe punishments. Too often we are seeing the revolving door of justice, and we also within the community cannot allow, once again, security to become a stepchild in the budgets. With all of the demands, I understand that this is the easiest thing to cut, that you won't have a guard outside, that you won't install the equipment, that you won't invest in the security requirements, but they will be more important, not less important. And we should think about how we can help aid and abet that. How do we get more money from the federal government, which is giving money in significant amounts, and institutions are getting money, that they include the security aspect as we move forward. You see the prisoners that have been released. We see so many challenges that could emerge in the aftermath of this. And too often it's security that gets sacrificed on the altar of expediency. We've seen the Zoom bombing, we've seen other events and threats, and the media coverage of Jews pretty hostile in many instances, unjustifiably. There were bad incidents, there were bad behavior on part of individuals, but if you look at totality, you see it's not, we are going to see a cutback in educational programs. You saw this year we lost much of the Holocaust programming, which is so important. So I think we have to focus, we have to build coalitions nationally and internationally. We should have more coordination and cooperation between our organizations on security, on the threats, on the challenges, and the opportunities. And I think we build on the IRA definition, on imposing it at campuses and getting it adopted by governments. It gives us a bottom line to which to measure them. I think we saw real improvements in the months before the crisis began, and hopefully we can pick that up again. But I think that this is going to really require us all to come together as a collective effort and share and support one another and try to make sure that our community gives security the priority that it demands.
Malcolm, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you for joining us today. I am passing the torch to my dear friend Dan Diker, who will now be presenting the rest of the speakers. Just one request from all of the speakers. We are extremely tight on time. Please, let's keep it to 5 minutes each. Dan, you will be now the bad guy and make sure that they do that. Dan, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ron, for sharing with me the privilege of introducing the next few speakers. I'm going to move now from Malcolm's assessment of the implications for diaspora Jewry on where we stand now in Israelophobia and the COVID-19 pandemic to a topic that's been overlooked, I think, all too much in the discourse, and that is the national security aspect of what we are facing right now. And I'd like to introduce Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, who is the head of Middle East Developments at the Jerusalem Center of Public Affairs, a senior fellow here, the former head of intelligence assessment at the Israel Defense Forces, and the former Director General of the Strategic Affairs Ministry. Brigadier General Kuperwasser will be talking about the national security aspect of Israelophobia and the pandemic, with some specific attention to the anti-Semitic developments in the Palestinian Authority as a source of some of the Israelophobic problems that we're confronting. Yossi?
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all the participants, and thank you the ministry for holding this meeting at this very important time when we all see that the anti-Semitism, new and old, are rising. I want to say a few words. I plan to say some words about what's happening, but this was already covered. So I'll move directly to why is it happening the way it does. And the first thing is that everything good that we can say about what Israel is doing doesn't interest the people who are promoting anti-Semitism. Israel is helping the Palestinians. Israel is making an unbelievable effort to make sure that they are not hit by the coronavirus themselves. This is praised by the international community. Who cares about that? The story from the Palestinians and from those who oppose Israel's existence is that even during the days of coronavirus, you have to continue fighting against it. And if you follow the Zoom, I do a little bit, when you follow the Zoom webinars of the BDSers, this is the message. We have to continue with the mukawama, with the struggle against the existence of Israel, even when we fight against the coronavirus. It's true, says Omar Barouti, that if the Israelis will come up with a vaccine, we shall use it. But then we shall continue fighting against its existence. So coming back to what Ilan said before, it's not only about our contribution to each and every country. It's about the contribution of Israel to the better life of, better welfare of the entire world. That we also have to learn about that. Maybe this was going to change something about the attitude of some of the people who listen to Barouti. But I think that the reasons that lie behind this matter is, first of all, they think that they can use this matter in order to approach the audiences and make them be more hostile to Israel and to the Jews. Now, many of these audiences are audiences that are ready to accept this message, like radical Muslims, like many of the Palestinians, like the progressive in the West. But some of this audience, you would expect that following this message of extreme anti-Semitism in days like that would make them absurd in the eyes of liberal groups in the West, like people inside the Democratic Party. Unbelievably, this is not happening. This is not happening. It's, if you follow, let's take a research center like the International Crisis Group, which is not progressive. It's liberal, maybe hard liberal, but not progressive. They issued a paper about Gaza in which they actually parrot much of the messages of the anti-Semites. So you ask yourself, what's going on here? Because when I look at the national security aspects of what's going on here, I'm really scared that this message can gain more support inside the liberals. And this may affect the Democratic Party in the United States that was mentioned already. And we need the support of both parties in the United States. This is a major element in our national security. And we should be concerned about the ongoing process of what's going on in the Democratic Party. It's, and not only there, it's, we see other left-leaning parties around the world who are not fighting against this message. And Israel needs Europe, maybe less than it needs the United States, of course, less than it needs the United States, but it still needs Europe. And you listen to Joseph Borrell, the way he accepts some of these messages, this is really frightening. And so we should be worried about the implications for national security. Secondly, they use it in order to promote their well-known political purposes, political goals, like easing the siege over Gaza or releasing the prisoners and things like that. On these issues, they get support from some people in the liberal ranks. It's something that's very concerning. Third, they use it in order to divert attention to their failed, I'm talking about the Palestinians, they use it in order to divert attention from their failed performance when it comes to their own needs, like health and the way they spend the money on corruption and on paying salaries to terrorists and on building tunnels. If they just took all that money and used it in order to build better hospitals, they would have been in a much better situation. But putting the blame on Israel makes it easier for them to skip the necessity to deal with these problems. And third, and maybe the most important thing, is that it's not only a tool for them to promote certain goals in a cynical way and gain more support. It's that many of these people really believe in what they're saying. Be it as ridiculous as it might sound, they really believe in what they're saying. Because if you look at the leadership of the Palestinians, be it Haniya on the one hand, or Abu Mazen on the other, they really believe that Israel is that bad. This is the story that Abu Mazen tells his constituency again and again. And they form the diplomatic agenda rhetorics based on these beliefs. So when you listen to the Palestinian Prime Minister Shtia blaming Israel for Israeli soldiers for spreading the disease by spitting on Palestinian cars, or for being interested in keeping the Israeli economy working on the expense of the health of the Palestinian people, this is not something that he uses just for cynical purpose to promote these ideas. These are things that really manifest what he thinks about Israel. This anti-Semitism is there, and what we need to do is not allow the Palestinians get away with this anti-Semitism. We spoke about here on all kinds of sources of anti-Semitism. We didn't speak about the Palestinian Authority paying salaries to terrorists to kill Jews. The way they reacted to the attack yesterday in Ma'ale Adumim, promoting the guy who carried the attack as a hero and a martyr. This is something that should be addressed by the international community and not left aside, because we actually let these people promote anti-Semitism. This should not be allowed. Thank you.
Yossi. Thank you, Yossi. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your insights on this. We're going to move swiftly to Ambassador Alan Baker, who has written a path-breaking chapter in the Israelophobia book, and has also brought attention to the concept of buzzwords that have been used in the discourse on Israel, which have led to these conspiratorial accusations against Israel and the Jewish people. And Alan, will you share with us some of your thinking on how some of these legal terms have been distorted and beyond recognition that can lead very easily to this type of conspiratorial talk that Natan Sharansky has helped us understand today?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. What we're talking about here is a very serious manipulation of the international community, international organizations, international media, through a repeated use of catchphrases and buzzwords, familiar phrases regularly used in international humanitarian law as a form of international algebra, which is, in our case, devoted only to stereotype, to vilify, to delegitimize and dehumanize the state of Israel. And from there, very, very quickly, onto the road towards anti-Semitism. It's a very short road. What I'm talking specifically is this: singling out, outlawing, and prioritizing Israel only. For instance, the legal and accepted term of art, occupation, which is an accepted situation in international law, in the context of Israel, has become, quote, illegal occupation. And it's even been further adapted to occupied Palestinian territory, despite the fact that the territory has never been determined in any agreement or any resolution or binding legal document as being Palestinian. The opposite. It's the subject of a dispute, and it's a subject of ongoing negotiation. But that hasn't prevented the international community accepting as lingua franca the term occupied Palestinian territory as if it's finished and there's no longer any negotiation and it's been prejudged in advance. Secondly, the issue of constructing on territory, on administered territory, on occupied territory, on non-private land is perfectly legal according to international law, but through the manipulation of this international legal algebra, it's become, in the terms used by Saib Arikat, by Mahmoud Abbas, by Hanan Ashrawi, it's become colonialism, settler colonialism, theft of land, and a criminal an international crime. Other expressions such as the 1967 border, anybody who follows the tweets by Saib Arikat, you'll see that there's not one day goes by when he, in all his meetings with foreign ministers and others, when he doesn't refer to the call for the 1967 border, despite the fact that there's never been a 1967 border, that Saib Arikat himself negotiated and drafted together with me and others the call to negotiate the issue of international boundaries and borders in the final status negotiation. The fact that he's using this term is a clear manipulation and a simple lie, but everybody's bought into it. Another phrase is the apartheid war. Anybody who really understands what apartheid is and what Israel is can't really accept this description of any type, any part of Israel as being apartheid. But the Palestinians have deliberately used this because apartheid is a buzzword that's accepted in the international community, and used against Israel, it criminalizes, it vilifies, it dehumanizes, delegitimizes Israel, and nobody gives a second thought to this. And finally, another example, the Gaza blockade, which again is being condemned, despite the fact that the UN itself, a UN committee, acknowledged the fact that Israel was fully justified in imposing the maritime blockade as long as there's still a danger of weaponry reaching Hamas. Now, all these things are openly being used and openly being accepted and being bandied about, and this is creating a huge amount of damage. And now that we're facing the coronavirus, we've got a new stereotype which is developing, which we've heard of from the previous speakers, of linking the state of Israel and the Jews to the spreading of the coronavirus and its development. So this is developing into something very, very dangerous, that how we deal with it is something that we all participating in this meeting have to think about very seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Alan Baker. I just wanted to just emphasize, I didn't properly introduce you. Alan Baker is the former legal advisor, Israel's foreign ministry, the former ambassador to Canada, and the head of the International Law Program and the Center for Contemporary Affairs at the Jerusalem Center. So thank you so much, Alan, for your insights here. We'll move quickly to Dr. Fiamma Nierenstein. Dr. Nierenstein was the former deputy president of the Italian Foreign Affairs Committee. She subsequently immigrated to Israel, and she is a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center, and is a very well-known, widely recognized authority on anti-Semitism. She's written many, many, many books on anti-Semitism in Europe, and Fiamma is going to help us understand the convergence of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism as political anti-Semitism in Europe, and as national security challenge for Israel and the Jewish people, and what might be done about it. Fiamma, are you with us? There you are.
Yes, here I am. Hi, Dan. Hi, everybody. Thank you for this wonderful occasion to discuss all together. I really got a lot of information and analysis from what has been said until now. I will speak 4 minutes because my first one I've been using already. So
yeah, I will just ask you please to raise your voice a little bit if you can.
Look, I can even put my computer closer so that, okay?
That's great, thank you.
I think that this is a totally political battle today, even more than ever. Yes, it's true, and you have described it so well. These conspiracy theories have been the basis all over the centuries and even the millennia for every persecutions of the Jews. So the temptation to put it in a moral, in a moral panorama, in a large context where the right and the left are all against us, and we will fight for the sake of our honor, even before of our political our political and freedom, it's very strong. But I think that nowadays the battle is mainly political, and this brings us to the necessity of distinguish who are the most terrible enemies that we have now in front, and where we have to fight. Now, the indications are not given by the conspiracy theory itself. You know, if you go, there are libraries, bibliotheques about this issue. If you only go and read so many books that have been written about this subject, you will find any kind of disgusting, obscene, vulgar kind of accusation toward the Jews, and the first reaction is disgust, and you would like not to deal with that. And this is the first sensation that I had. Then you go deep into it, and what do you find over there? You find that Ismail Milhem and Mohammed Shtaye deal with it, like the Iranians also, from the political, precise point of view of the occupation, as it has been said already by several colleagues of mine. It is the settlers, it is the soldiers, it is Israel in its main core, as it is defined in the fantasies, in the hateful fantasies of these very specific enemies that describe the way that in their mind the Jews spread the illness throughout, first of all, their own world and societies, and all over the world. Now, should we be worried about that? I think that we must be very worried, but we just, I try to make it very short. Of course, the analysis is long, and I have written already about it. So whoever will like will find my articles about that. But I want to point out just this very point. Nobody in the civilized world will frankly accept this point of view. There will not be Macron, no Angela Merkel, and not the European Union, and not the United Nations that would say, oh yes, it's true that the Jews spread coronavirus. Nobody will say that. But there is a civilized way of saying that. There is a civilized way that just consists in the idea that the poor Palestinian being occupied, of course, it's not the Jews that spread the morb inside the occupied, illegally occupied, as Alan said, territories. But it is because they are closed inside, that they could never develop their own structures. Actually, they suffer more than anybody else because of the terrible story that imposed on them not to exercise their ability in constructing a society, and their hospitals, and their health system, and whatever else a free society can do. So whoever is in favor of a free society then will be able to say that, no, it's not the Jews. Otherwise, you will consider us anti-Semite. But it's true, it is the occupation that has caused this situation. Now, this puts a very clear link, as it is, as we have read, and the IHRA, as you call it, IHRA, has been adopted in so many places. But we have kept considering the IHRA a prayer and not an imposition. Maybe only the United States, I'm sorry, I don't see Carr over there, but Carr knows very well that the executive order is the only state, maybe Austria too, that imposes the IHRA as a law. You know, it's forbidden in the United States to continue delegitimizing the state of Israel through anti-Semite fantasies. It's forbidden because otherwise you will take from the universities, the movements, the parties that promote this point of view, all the financing and the political help and the intellectual legitimization because it's forbidden. So what I'm saying now is that we must start using now the ICRAN and any other tool we have, like the one that has been used 2 days ago, stopping, and certainly Yossi, that is a promoter of this kind of action, has an intellectual part in it, at least, as stopping the financing of the activities of the Palestinian Authority at the moment when the asata, the incitement, becomes dangerous, strong, and anti-Semite. And when I say anti-Semite, I relate exactly to the fact of using the occupation as an agent, as a vector of anti-Semitism. We must decide that the use of occupation in this way is a vector, is an agent of anti-Semitism. It's not a way of exercising freedom of speech. So this is the way I see it. We are in front of a strong political struggle. Look,
Yama, can you summarize?
Course, let me finish just one sentence.
Okay.
As Malcolm says, we must defend, of course, the Jews in the diaspora. This is something that we have to do, and we must recognize that they are endangered by this kind of situation. But also Macron, also Angela Merkel, also the European Union will theoretically defend them. The only one that they will really attack is the state of Israel under this flag. So this is something that we have to keep in our mind. This is
okay. Thank you very much, Fiamma. Important message. We'll move quickly to Olga Beshwe, Washington, in Stockton, California, currently. Olga has written a path-breaking article in the book on what is really the central accusation of the Israelophobia phenomenon, which is that the accusation that Israel is an apartheid state. This is the beating heart of the Israelophobia phenomenon that bleeds into anti-Semitism, as I think we may hear from Olga now. And Olga, we apologize for the lateness of the hour, but please share your thinking as a South African whose family suffered under apartheid about this constant accusation against Israel.
Well, Dan, thank you very much for this opportunity, for the opportunity to contribute to the book, and thank you to the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the JPCA for this amazing roundtable. Just listening to everybody, it's been very insightful, and I've learned a lot. When Ambassador Dore Gold spoke, my heart sang, and not only did it sing as an African, but also because I personally believe that Africa is Israel's most strategic ally. And not only from a political perspective, so from voting in the United Nations to also voting in the AU, but when you look at the economic opportunities that present itself from investment perspectives, both from Israel as well as to Africa, we need to focus on how Africa can become better. And one of the core aspects to bettering those relations, not only on an African perspective, but globally, is this lie which emanates from my country, from the African continent, that Israel is an apartheid state. Now, because this word has been used, bantered around so much, people have, in my opinion and my experience, have forgotten what the true meaning of this is. So very briefly, as a recap of what the definition is that for 46 years, the South African government, through a regime where we had over 150 codified laws that separated people purely because of the color of their skin and the texture of their hair. If you were Black, you weren't allowed in certain places, public hospitals. I couldn't go to various public spaces. We couldn't have marriages of different people of different races. You don't find that in Israel. My father now in South Africa, he's in our version of the Knesset. During apartheid regime, you would not have found Arabs within the Knesset. You could not find them in hospitals, going to the same universities to study. So this whole narrative that Israel is an apartheid state is a lie. And if we want to totally dismantle the BDS conversation, then we have to once again remind everybody as to why this is a lie. Also, because people want to give substance or want to give credibility to this lie, they like to invoke the words of our former president, a global icon, former President Nelson Mandela. And one of the lines that they like to use is when he said that South Africa's freedom will not truly be free or not truly be materialized until the Palestinian people are free. Now, whilst it's true that he did say that, they oftentimes forget the fact that he visited Israel in the year 1999. And also, in visiting Israel, he mentioned the fact that Israel has the right to live and exist within secure borders. So former President Nelson Mandela was not only pro-Palestinian, which many of us are. We want to see the Palestinian people live in security. We want to see them also have the opportunity to prosper. He was pro-Israel as well. But people who use the apartheid lie show that they've got a disinterest with regards to actually seeing the true liberation of the Palestinian people. But they want to just have want to continue the delegitimization and the demonization of Israel, which is primarily why they use it. The second point as well that I also look at in my contribution to the book, amongst many other things, is this buzzword of Israel being a colonizer state. And without going into much of it, we have got to also look to the fact that this is not true. How can a people who are indigenous to the land be colonizers? And once we start to take back these two narratives in particular, then I do believe that because it's a central strategy to the BDS campaign, that we will be able to, Dan used the word, the heartbeat. If it's a heartbeat to this whole conversation, if we can cut these arteries, these two main arteries, then we'll find that the impact of the BDS and its anti-Semitic partners will continue to, or rather will start to demise. So I know that time is limited, and so I'll just leave everything there.
Thank you. I think you've been the most concise speaker. You win the concise speaker of the afternoon award. Thank you very much. And I really urge people to read your brilliant article in the Israelophobia in the West Book at jcpa.org. It's really it's a university education in one article. Thank you, Olga. We're going to move to our dear friend and colleague Luba Meakiso in Cape Town. Luba is an advocate. He's an international attorney. He's the director of Africa for Israel. We have been colleagues and friends for a number of years, Luba. And Luba, you've drawn our attention over the last years to the appropriation of South African apartheid in the accusation against Israel. And you've drawn our attention in the past as to why these types of libelous and slanderous accusations have no basis in truth. We specifically wanted two South African contributors, one after the other, because of the fact that at the very base of this historical and more contemporary anti-Semitism is this accusation that Israel is an apartheid state and therefore illegitimate. So we wanted to bring you folks in with your own historical and specific backgrounds to help create more perspective on this issue. Luba.
Dan, thank you very much to you and to the other hosts for inviting me. And I'd really like to echo a lot of what Olga has said. I think the challenge is that for me in South Africa is the battle is very different. Firstly, to go back to the issue of COVID, it has been a strange blessing in the sense that everything around Israeli Apartheid Week was suspended because of the coronavirus. But having said that, I've been involved in this battle in trying to speak the truth about Israel for about 10 years. And the lessons that I've learned is that it's a battle that affects the present and the future, but it's based on manipulation of the historical facts. And in South Africa, those facts are very difficult to comprehend because we're such a continent away from Israel. Many people don't have a robust knowledge of what has taken place in the Middle East and Israel, and therefore you can deceive people fairly easily. What BDS has done, and they call themselves now a very different name, Africa for Palestine, what they've done very well is to repeat a lie over and over and over. And although it's a blatant lie, over time, it has begun to gain traction and people have believed that. And I think for us in South Africa, the appeal of the BDS narrative has been the fact that they've moved away from dealing with history and reality and kind of given it a veneer of this is about human rights, this is about justice. And for many people, that resonates. And in South Africa, as Olga has said, with our history of apartheid, you've got a country that is probably 8.8% white and about 8.2% colored, and the rest are Black Africans. So if you take people that experienced apartheid, you would have about 91%. So when you talk of apartheid, occupation and any racism, it's something that people can relate to. And there lies the danger, is that there's an absolute lack of knowledge of what is happening in Israel, but we can relate to what we're being told. So the history has been completely removed, and we're being told, for instance, take now around COVID-19. You know, BDS went on their website and they said Israel has not printed notifications in Arabic. Prisons are going to be epicenters. So even during this virus, the information has continued to come through that demonizes Israel and paints Israel in a very negative way. And the challenge we have in this country is that if Black South Africans agree that Israel is an apartheid state, that's a narrative that's very difficult to overcome anywhere else in the world because we understand apartheid. And so it becomes very important to fight it here domestically. And what BDS has done here is embed themselves within structures like the Council of Churches. So you would find, for instance, that the former spokesperson for the Council of Churches was part of the BDS board. A former member of parliament who was the chairperson of our Foreign International Relations Subcommittee is now the chairperson of BDS. So BDS has access into government, the church, and can therefore taint the discussion. I don't want to take up too much time, but what I would say is, what I've learned is that the way to deal with this is two-pronged. It has to be nuanced. Part of it is saying, I need to speak the truth, and I need to dispel the lies that are being put out there about Israel. But at the same time, I think we must recognize that we've got to devote some energy to portraying Israel and the Jewish people in a different light than they're currently seen. We can't just fight the negativity and go toe-to-toe with BDS in every single arena. For example, if you take healthcare or water, energy, there's a lot more that Israel can do in that arena without having to necessarily fight about Zionism. I've mentioned to you, Dan, before that I worked with some colleagues in some of the East African countries, and we never touched the issue of two-state, one-state solution Zionism. We're simply focused on what Israel can do for Africa. I think most people are worried about their health right now, are worried about their children, are worried about having water, energy, all of those issues. And when you start addressing those issues with Israeli technology, it reshapes people's minds. So you've got to balance and say, yes, let's fight the negativity. Let's get the truth out there. But at the same time, let's show people what can be done. And I want to end by just saying this. BDS started in South Africa in 2005, and for a good number of years gained no traction. But just by being persistent and going on about it, they did gain some traction with our politicians and the church and some members of the church. They've now decided to take their roadshow into the rest of Africa. And the question then is, are we going to wait for them to get to other African countries like they have South Africa before we react? Or are we going to get there ahead of them and get the positive, the correct message about Israel there, so that when somebody comes along and says, this is what Israel is about, or the Jewish people, our brothers and sisters in Africa have their own understanding of what Israel can do, and that will be contrary to any poison that BDS can bring. It's far easier to bring a positive message to people who haven't heard it than to try and eradicate the poison. One of the battles I've had has been speaking to people who've been poisoned by BDS, because when you get to them with the truth, they'll keep saying to you, but is it true? Is it true that Israel does this? Now, it's an incredibly difficult battle, but if you can get the head of BDS in the rest of Africa so that people see the Jewish people for who they are and they see Israel for who she is, by the time BDS makes those inroads, they'll be speaking to people who already know and understand.
Thank
I
you.
hope that does help in some way.
Yes, that's very helpful, Luba. The message is similar to one we heard from Dory Gold earlier, which is take initiative in Africa and recreate the story.
Yes.
Be first mover and create the story. We're going to go to our last formal speaker, Joshua Washington, also in Stockton, California. And Joshua is the director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. He's the son of one of the most wonderful theologians in the United States, and also a leader in the African American community, Reverend Dumasani Washington. And Joshua, you follow very well in the steps of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and your dad. And we want to hear from you just a little bit, a few minutes of thinking on the challenge of the anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic discourse in parts of the U.S. Black community, and in your view, what can be done in a few short minutes. Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you, Dan. And it's been a pleasure to hear everyone speak. I want to echo Elon's words about education being very important. Thinking about the bubonic plague and how it quickly turned to blaming the Jews for that particular plague, and where we are now talking about coronavirus. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Is what Mark Twain says, and we definitely see that happening now. But our weapon remains the same, at least for me, and then for us in the Black community, for us in IPSI, our weapon remains the same, which is truth, which is education. Oftentimes, the reason why we have so many Black Americans who feel emboldened in their anti-Israel, anti-Semitic stances are because of the fact that they feel that they have history on their side. They honestly don't know anything about Black American Zionism in history besides maybe a couple of quotes from Martin Luther King. And even then, those quotes get called into question sometimes. And so at IPSI, we educate people about not just what Martin Luther King said, and not only his deep relationship with the Jewish community and his friendship with Rabbi Joshua Heschel, but his legacy. Bayard Rustin is one of Martin Luther King's closest aides. And in 1973, he founded an organization called Black Americans Supporting Israel Committee, which garnered a lot of support from a lot of Black civil rights leaders, Count Basie, and celebrities, jazz artists, people like Rosa Parks, people like Coretta Scott King, Lionel Hampton was the treasurer, A. Philip Randolph, other leaders in the community, that some 200 people who signed on to this committee at its birth, who not only spoke out in support of the state of Israel, but against the tyranny and the oppression that the Palestinians were suffering under Yasser Arafat at the time. And they were very much, especially Bayard Rustin, he was very much a very strong voice in support of Israel, and also calling out the Black community for, as our stance became more and more friendly toward Palestinian leaders, he was calling them out. He was saying that we are giving up our moral voice. We are giving up the authority that we have gained just in history of the things that we've struggled through and our legacy. We're forfeiting that to stand with an oppressive regime that oppresses its own people. And for people who, especially the Black community, who learn about these things, there's always a group of people who are taken aback. They have to take a step back and really look at these things because they had no idea. It's not really anywhere. And I want to say that, when Martin Luther King said what he said about Israel, or when BASIC was formed, it was never just out of the blue. Martin Luther King didn't just stand up one day and say, you know what, I'm going to say some nice words about the Jewish people. It was always in response to what they saw as a rising tide of anti-Semitism in the Black community. So Martin Luther King said what he said about Israel being an oasis of brotherhood and democracy in the Middle East after he was asked, how would you respond to the radical movement in the Black community that's coming against the Jewish people? And one of the things that he said before he even said what he said about Israel was that there are those of us in the Black community who are color consumed, and we see some sort of mystique in being colored, and we see anything non-colored as being condemned. And he was saying that we don't follow that course. So what he was speaking to some in the Black community's inability to separate skin tone from content of character, which is what he talked about. And then he talks about how Israel is the only viable and democracy in the Middle East. He talks about how he supports Israel, and we must all support Israel. And then his proteges form this organization that very much speaks out in support of Israel. That's very important. Again, because this is after the Black Panthers and the radical Black activists were speaking out. This is after some of these major organizations were writing articles against Israel. This was after the 6-Day War. So this was after Israel really started getting pummeled in the political spheres. You know, these people came out and in response to that said, no, we support Israel and we stand with Israel, and here's why. And that's very important. So education, no matter where we are, no matter what is going on right now, you know, all of us are quarantined. Education is still the key. People speak out of ignorance. They speak out of false information, and we have to combat that with the truth. And I'll say this last thing. And for me, it's we have to do it in love, but we have to hit it with full force, because there are people who take this information. Obviously, we've seen sometimes where this pattern of thinking has its final logical conclusion has always been the destruction of the Jewish people. But we have to come against the lies, even if it means that in our own groups, you know, in the Black community, I'm often alienated. I'll share articles in Black groups that I'm a part of, and maybe 85% of the people in that group will come against me. But there is that 15% that follows IPSI, that follows what other people are doing, that actually looks into what we're doing, and we have to do it for those people.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right, Joshua. I think that what you represent and what Olga represents and Luba is really a new international alliance between the Jews, certainly Black Americans, the way we did in the tradition of Martin Luther King, and around the world. This is a very, very important alliance to rebuild today, and we thank you very much for sharing your thinking with us. It's really, it's not common enough, and we need to do it even more. So we are running very, very late. We do want to take as many questions as possible, Ron. And so I turn back to you to squeeze in as many questions in the coming minutes as we can.
Yes, so I'll just mention that I received 56 questions. And if I'll even take 10% of them, then you will have to explain my wife why I came home so late. So I picked the top
I'll explain to her.
Okay, I trust you. I'll pick the top 3 questions that I see as most relevant or most important, but I will write down my email in the chat box, and feel free to send me any question. I truly apologize that we will not be able to get to all of the questions. Send me any question that you want for any of the speakers, and I will make sure that you get the answer from this person in a timely fashion. Okay, so I apologize in advance. And I hope all of the speakers are still here. I will want to start with Ilan Carr, whom I hope is still here. Just a second, let's see. Ilan, oh, you're here. Oh, yeah. There you are, great. Okay, so there was a question here, Ilan, for you, talking about coordination in a diplomatic, political level between different countries in the world. How do you see the possibility of having this kind of coordination, collaboration between different countries, and in what specific topics and aspects do you see this kind of collaboration?
Well, that's exactly what I do. I mean, as America's lead diplomat on the fight against anti-Semitism, much of my work, and in addition to the policy work I do, much of my work is diplomatic, bilateral and multilateral diplomacy with countries around the world to coordinate our efforts to fight anti-Semitism. And I'm happy to report that we enjoy remarkable partnerships. In fact, you know, I'm actually optimistic. If I weren't optimistic, I wouldn't have taken the job. I'm actually optimistic because we have a great many partners around the world who are extraordinary leaders at all levels of government, from heads of state, certainly at the ministerial level and parliamentary level, and anti-Semitism coordinators, who are game-changing leaders and committed in remarkable fashion to the fight against anti-Semitism, because they understand that anti-Semitism isn't only about the Jews, and the fight against anti-Semitism isn't only about protecting Jews. Anti-Semitism is history's greatest barometer of human suffering. And so it is a danger, a clear and present danger, to all of our societies, to all of our values, and to all of our collective children and their future. And so our partners around the world get that, understand it, and are fighting very hard to work real change on the ground. It's one of the reasons, by the way, that there's been a civil war in the Labour Party in the UK. It's one of the reasons why, by the way, that through the leadership of people like Lord John Mann and Lord Eric Pickles and others, that many Brits who were surveyed in exit polls said that anti-Semitism was one of the reasons they voted the way they voted. I mean, think about that. You know, we talk about the bad news often, but we don't talk about the big wins. You know, when you've got ordinary rank and file Brits, a major country in Europe, saying that I'm embarrassed by anti-Semitism. This isn't the kind of country I want for my children. That is a huge win. In France today, every single police cadet and every single prosecutor cadet in the country is being trained on hate crimes prosecution. And again, that's a program, and thanks to great leaders in France who've instituted this. In Germany, thanks to the work of people like anti-Semitism coordinator Felix Klein, and Germany has federalized the fight against anti-Semitism. So not only is there a federal coordinator, but 16 separate German states have their own coordinators fighting anti-Semitism. It's one of the reasons why, in a groundbreaking moment, the German Bundestag voted that BDS is anti-Semitism. And not only did they say it's anti-Semitism, but the German Bundestag stated BDS is reminiscent of the Juden boycotts of the 1930s. And it's a remarkable statement. That happened 8 months ago, but more recently, the Austrian Bundestag voted that BDS is anti-Semitism. You know, I mean, the examples are all over the world through the work of people like Frédéric Poitier, Katharina von Schnurbein, who's the anti-Semitism coordinator for the EU, worked out a deal with internet companies where anti-Semitic content is removed within 24 hours of a report. So, you know, there are really great things happening around the world thanks to our friends and allies and partners who get it and understand it. And on that score, I want to end my answer by saying that of all the people around the world, and we have great friends, champions of the cause, there is no greater champion of this cause than the US administration. From President Trump to Vice President Pence to my boss, Secretary Pompeo, we have never had a leadership team in the United States committed in this fashion, in an unprecedented way, to fighting anti-Semitism, to protecting the Jewish people throughout the world, and to supporting the state of Israel. And with that kind of commitment from the United States of America and from our friends and allies as well, with whom we have the great privilege of working on a regular basis, we can roll this back, and God willing, we'll do that.
Majority of Israelis support public transportation on Shabbat, and regarding the non-Jewish, the Arab population, that 51 non-Jewish Israelis believe that there was a Jewish temple on Temple Mount. Those of you who are interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict know for sure that this is a...
Sorry, Malcolm. Now can you hear me?
Now I can. I couldn't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I muted myself. So Malcolm, the question for you is as follows. About the pro-Israel network worldwide, the pro-Israel NGOs operating all over the world in defense of Israel, combating anti-Semitism, combating delegitimization of Israel. We hear many evidences that this current crisis will affect many different organizations. This or another extent, even we hear about organizations that might not even exist after this crisis. How do you see the importance of the pro-Israel NGOs, pro-Israel network worldwide, especially in these days in combating the issues that we've raised here in this conversation, and the importance of the resilience of this network?
Well, resilience is our middle name for the Jewish people, and I'm confident that we will emerge from this. Not the same, it'll be very different. We don't know yet how different. I think that there are organizations that may not survive. We already see signs of it. We see the closing of Jewish publications. We see other manifestations, but most have not come to terms yet with the true economic impact. We don't know when fundraising will be able to take place. We don't know how governments will be able to allocate funds after spending huge amounts in combating the virus and in providing assistance. And still the humanitarian needs are going to take precedence. I think most people don't even consider raising money for organizations when we don't have food for people, for elderly people, for others, when we need to provide for their medical and physical care. So we are not yet in a position, but I do believe, and that's why what I said earlier, that I think collectivizing the effort, we're trying to do that here. I think we see more of a willingness for organizations to come together, because everybody knows they're not going to be able to do it alone. And if we can show how each can enhance their role, even with more limited resources, by working together. And as you know, Eran, I've been advocating that we set up a global security network of all of those working the security area to share information, best practices, but also alerts. Because just as the Europeans and others got the virus first, or gave us the alert about it, and had people listen more to some of the countries, we might have spared more lives. The same thing is true in terms of the current security threats. And I think it's really going to be important for organizations to set aside a little bit of their institutional interests, maybe, and to look at the collective need and bigger picture. I fully believe that when the campuses come back, we saw some of the BDS legislation put on hold, and one even reversed while the students were off campus. When they come back, they're going to be going full blast, and especially if it's before the conventions, when everybody will be grandstanding. So I think that that we all collectively should think about, how do we share resources? How do we bring people together? We've done calls now with leaders from different countries, and frankly, it had a really profound impact on our constituents, on the member organizations of the Conference of Presidents. So this is a time when we have to, frankly, be prepared to do some zero-sum planning, to look at our communities and say, honestly, who belongs and where can we cut and where do we have to enhance? But it will take a lot of courage, and it'll take a really fortitude on the part of leaders, both professional and lay, to make that possible.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, for that. Much appreciated. I have to apologize once again for all of those who sent important, intelligent questions. As I said, 56 of them that we will not be able to get to. We are way after the time we were supposed to finish. I encourage you, as I said, to send me, I just sent you over the chat my email, my personal email. I'm Ron Rumer, once again, from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. Feel free to send me any kind of question about anything, and I will make sure it gets to the right person and that you get your answers in a timely fashion. I want to say a special thank you to Dan Diker, to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs for collaborating in this great initiative and this great roundtable. Thank you all for, yeah, you can clap quietly. I see Elad, yeah, great. Thank you all for joining us and lasting for almost 2 hours now. It was exhausting, but I hope it was beneficial and helpful for all of you. Just in order for all of you to say goodbye and stay healthy, I will right now unmute all of you. Okay.
The JCPS.
All unmuted.
Thank you very much.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you so much. Stay well, everyone.
Be in good health.
Thank you very much.
Many people will
Israel.
we sent an email with Zoom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom from England. Shabbat shalom from Brighton.
Shabbat shalom from Australia.
Same as interesting. Shalom from South
Norway.
Yeah, but 5 minutes.
Shalom Yerushalayim.
LA Beach, Florida.
Shalom from South Africa.
Never has anything new to say. I'm from Rome. Just finished watching them either way. Anyway, say hi to Czech. I haven't seen him in a long time.
That's why I had to hire this Mick when I ain't got no booze to sell.
I haven't seen anybody in a long time. Why is that different than anybody else? No different from anybody else, I guess. I just haven't missed you. It's like staying home. Yes. Be well. Take care. See you when we can all get out.
So the whole fucking equation depends on you just got a low last month. The cheap shit.
Yes, apparently a lot.
ממש טוב, הבעיה חרגנו מאוד מאוד בזמנים, אז היה רק 56 אנשים שאלו שאלות, ורק לקחנו 2. אנחנו סיימנו רק אחרי שעה וחצי בדוברים במקום שעה.
אבל אני נוסע ואני רואה מקומות.
אבל זה היה מאוד מאוד מעניין.